Hey, it's Drybear. Path of Exile 2 is an awesome ride with tons of challenges and lots of things to explore, but today I want to give you a bunch of tips and tricks that might help you improve instantly in the game so you can get through the game and start playing with your endgame build. Now don't worry, I'm chilling here on the very first zone. I'm not going to show you anything if people care about spoilers. We're just talking about tips about the gameplay and options that'll make it a lot easier for you to progress. The first one is a very easy trick if you're running into issues with meeting stat requirements. So if you're running to gear options and things like that, where you need a specific stat requirement or a skill needs a stat requirement, there's something that you can actually gain access to very easily to change or access your stats there. So once you unlock the hooded one, without talking about the story, it is an NPC that you will gain in your camp pretty early on. It's like maybe like an hour into the game. You should be able to unlock him and have him in the camp, and he'll do a couple things for you, but one of the most important things that he does for you is allows you to refund your passive tree. However, one thing that's super nice about Path of Exile 2 that I wish more games would do is that you're able to change nodes by refunding them without having to back up the whole tree. So if I'm down here, I don't have to like remove the furthest node on my passive skill tree, go all the way back in order to change. So on what's called the attribute highway, so you have these nodes that you're getting here, when you come down here, these on the attribute highway allow you to select one of the three main stats as you're moving through the attribute highway. So when you select these, you can choose any attribute you want. But what's awesome is you can actually go to the hooded one in one of your town encampments and change which stat is allocated for a single fee without interrupting any of your other nodes on your tree. So if you wanted to, you could click on this and change this to one of the other stats that's available on the highway, pay the cost for it, and then you'll be good to go, and that's it. So if you ever run into a situation where you end up with like, you need you're 4 strength short or 3 intelligence short, or you just need 2 more dexterity to get the thing you want, you can very easily come over here, hit refund, and change one of your highway stats to a different stat that allows you to get that. On top of course, you can get items that have stats on them. So if you need some dexterity or something, you can get that from an item, but it's an easy way to fill that need in a pinch. Next is making sure you gain access to all of the permanent unlocks for your character by going through the story. On the world map, by pressing U on PC, you'll bring this up. Around each of these zone areas, you'll see these little icons. Now, it'll tell you that there is something that you need to do near that zone, and it'll have an icon next to it. Skulls are bosses and different encounters. There's quests that you can do as well. But the one I want to draw your attention to is that when these have this plus sign in front of them, that means that they give you a permanent unlock. And some of these can be incredibly valuable. 2 skill points, resistances that you desperately need, giving you all kinds of bonuses and benefits that your character will need to get stronger to complete the campaign and go to endgame. You want to make sure you get these plus signs. And I see this all the time. People ask, how do I know if I've already done it? So the way you see it on screen right now is if it's grayed out, it means you've already completed it. If it's lit up, then you haven't, which I know isn't the easiest thing to distinguish, but you get used to distinguishing them. So right here, you can see the bottom one I have completed, but I haven't done the ones on the top. So they have this kind of like gradient to them. They have shading and darkness. They have a little bit of this like bronze brown tinge to it. That means they're still lit up, but if they're grayed and have a little bit of opacity loss, it means that you've already done them. So just make sure that you don't move on from each zone until you've completed at least all of the areas and encounters around that zone that give you that little plus sign, because you'll need it. The next one is a little bit about instances and map exploration resetting. So the way PoE 2 is set up right now, which is actually pretty nice, is that there's a timer based for a map that you explore. So if we were to walk out into a zone, clear the zone, and then, you know, wait a while and leave the zone and wait a while, it would reset. However, if you get back fast enough, so it's just the zone outside the first town, if we cleared this and then we wanted to come back, if we disconnected to come back, you would still have the same map progress because it's not connection based, it's time based. And so you can actually just come back in and still have the map progress. However, you might run into situations where you want to farm the same zone again, or you want to reset it to see if you can find something that you missed before, or you're just looking for items or loot or experience. There is a way to reset instances without having to zone out and wait for them to time out. And the easiest way to do that is to go to a waypoint, and then when you open up the waypoint map, if you hold Control on PC before clicking a waypoint, it will bring up the instance manager, and you can actually just hit new on this to reset and refresh the instance, and they remind you that instances stay open for about 8 to 15 minutes if you're not in them. So it's about how long it takes. It can vary depending on their garbage collection and when those get taken out, but it's great because you can disconnect, come back in the game, you still have the progress, but if you want to do the same zone again, location, go to the waypoint, go to this here, and then you can hold control and left click. I'm not sure what it is on console. People can drop that in the comments down below, but that allows you to reset zones that you may need. The next thing I'll remind you is that there are checkpoints, and knowing how to use them properly is a big part of progressing through the difficult areas, especially when you get to cruel difficulty on the campaign and towards the end game as well. Checkpoints and waypoints being discovered for the first time are a massive part of you surviving. So like in your roguelite modes, like the 2 trials and the endgame activities and wells in town, checkpoints, when you first discover them, will actually refill your flask charges. So for example, I can take my flask off here. I have no flask charges. I can even take this off and I can lose charges on my charm. But if I run over here and I accept this, you can see that I glowed blue and red. That means that it refilled all of my charm charges, all of my flask charges there as well. So what you might use this for is if maybe you found a new flask that's better than yours, but you know that if you grab a new flask and you equip it, it's going to be empty. You'll either have to go back to town to refill it at the well, or you'll have to kill enemies to get flask charges to refill it. But if you see a checkpoint's coming, you hit the checkpoint, you will refill it instantly and get that value for it. And planning around this, I think, can help you navigating some of the more difficult zones where you really need to manage your flask charges. And also, the first time you encounter a waypoint, it will do this as well. Of course, you could always just go back to town and hit a well to refresh, but in some cases, you really need to rely on those flask resets to get through tough spots. The next thing that I would recommend is taking advantage of weapon sets, and there's like a long laundry list of things. You could probably make a full video going over weapon sets and weapon attribute points and passive points for the weapon set system, but I think even just very minimally, it's very good to take advantage of weapon sets because it opens you up to a lot of opportunities. So let's walk through what those actually are. If you didn't know, you have a 1 set and a 2nd set for weapons. This can be any 2 weapons that you have the stats required to equip. And if you didn't know as well, inside of the skill system itself is limited by weapon. So the skills themselves are tied to the weapon. So what that means is you can have 2 different kinds of weapons equipped, and you can use the skills from 2 different kinds of weapons as well, which gives you the option to create some really cool combinations for that. But if you're just starting out and trying to get through the story, I would recommend for the weapon sets is either use 2 different weapons of different value just to get like different strength. Like you could use something for the weapon sets, like for elemental, you can have a weapon that has cold damage on it and a weapon that has fire damage on it. And then you can force the skills to use the correct weapon so you get the most value out of those abilities, even though you're using them inside of the same weapon type. But you can also use it to just quickly add in some other skills from other weapons that might be useful to you while you're progressing and getting to end game as well. Like finding things that might be useful. Maybe you want to put a shockwave totem in your build, and you certainly can. You can even just equip a shield in your 2nd set. If you put the shield here as well, you'll notice that if I have the shield equipped and I put this on, I can actually just bring out my normal weapon, fight, and if I want to, I can block with the shield and I can fight as well. And that is dynamic. It happens all the time. On PC, you can also press X to swap instantly between your 2 setups. It's perfectly, easy to do. There's no cooldown there. And again, you can make it do it automatically. And as part of that as well, you might find through these gems that there's things that you want to add to your build that are separate from it. So using the weapon sets is a big opportunity, even if you're not trying to make the fanciest build in the world, to make sure that you can round things out properly. Next, I want to give a tip about selling, disenchanting, and salvaging and the difference between them, because I see a lot of people asking on which is better, which one should I do? And the answer is, honestly, it depends, but I think there's a lot to know about that. So when you go to a vendor in any of the towns, this is the first town you can walk to, you have the option to sell items. If you sell items to the vendor, you will get gold for that, and that gold can be used to randomly generate new items from the Gamba guys. You can actually just get more items for that as well. You can also use the gold to refund your passives and respec yourself, and generally is just useful for a lot of things. So this is kind of your base option for just selling things, and I would recommend sell a bunch of stuff in your first few levels or your first hour of play so you can generate enough gold to make sure that you can just refill or replace items that aren't working for you. Make sure you get an amulet in slot and a ring in slot, and you just fill out all your gear slots so you're getting the most value out of your gear before you start customizing it further. Your next option is to disenchant items. This only works on items that are magic quality or higher, so it has to be a blue item, a yellow item, or have affixes on it, and that will be disenchantable. It'll tell you what you get when you disenchant it, and this is normally where you get most of your crafting currency or your currency items themselves, where you can go through and start creating items, modifying items, making items better or worse, all that sort of thing. But a lot of this comes from disenchanting. And if you're really struggling to progress, what you can do is just pick up everything, make several trips to town, disenchant as much as you can until you get a good stash of currency items. And once you do, make good enough gear so you don't have to fiend after everything on the ground like you're starving to death as hard. But that will give you a lot of options for building up good gear early on. And the last thing I want to make you aware of is the salvage bench. And this is before we get into like full end game crafting, but salvaging is actually very useful in this game. What it'll do is you can only salvage items that have quality or sockets on them, and it'll give you the items you need to add quality or sockets to other items. So you'll notice that you have these things that allow you to add, like you can put Artificer's Orbs, which allows you to add sockets. You have the ways to add quality to armor or weapons. And by the way, having that on your gear is very important because it can very easily be the difference between killing a boss or not. So if we take this and I add this to a weapon, you notice that as I do this, the quality of the weapon, the damage of the weapon goes up, the stats get better and better. So doing that is super worthwhile as you progress through the game. However, you want to be keeping an eye out for items that drop that have quality or sockets on them, because rather than going to the vendor here and you have an item that's like, you know, you could disenchant it if you wanted to, if you notice that it has quality or if it has the sockets on them, it might be worth instead to go over to the salvage bench and salvage that item to get the items you need to put quality and sockets on the gear you're actually using. It can make a massive difference. You can get 40% damage increase, you can get life on hit, mana on hit. There's so many different things that you can do with the soul cores and the runes and the quality of your gear that will make a big difference in you being able to clear the boss you're struggling with. Next, a quick note on options that you may not know exist. One of the first ones is if you go to options down to interface, you can actually show a mini life bar above you, above allies, and above enemies as well. So if you're in an action area and normally your game, when you first load into the game, will have nothing in the open field, which I think has the best immersion for it as well. So you can take this setting off and it looks like this normally. But sometimes people, especially if you're playing on console 10 feet away from your TV screen, it might be useful to actually have this showing above your health bar or above your character so you can see how much health and mana you have. And you can even turn this on for enemies and bosses as well. So if you don't want to look at the top of the screen for the enemy health bar, you can just have it displayed above their character, which I think can be a little bit better for some people. So if you come down here and you turn on mini life bar above you, you can also turn it on enemies, allies, or enemies and allies, which will give you that option to display it as well, which some people may like. Also, a couple settings that I would make sure are on. They should be on by default, but not always. I think everyone should always have show full descriptions on. They will shorthand the descriptions so you're not overwhelmed with a huge wall of text when you look at something. Like it just be like this huge text box that's crazy. But I do believe that the process of learning Path of Exile is important to see the full description, all of the monikers, all the notations, so you can read and understand it. And it might be worth, if you're new, just sitting down and reading your descriptions, as silly as that sounds, because it makes a big difference in you being able to put builds together and understand what's working and what's not. Under interface, you can also turn on support gem utility pop-up. This one's pretty cool. When you have a support gem in your inventory and you hover over it, it'll tell you what skills use it versus not. This is actually a big thing when you're selecting skills as well. So you'll notice that you have like a list of gems that you can list up here. But sometimes when you're looking at this, you may not realize that a support gem may not work on the ability you're trying to put it on. So it's important to keep that in mind. And on that note, the next thing is that you have a lot of options for gems, weapons, and for support, spirit gems, on hit, triggers, things like that. All of those are bigger than they seem at first. They make sure that you don't get overwhelmed. So for example, if I were to come here to the support gem and I look at a skill, this is the default thing you see right off the bat. And this is a limited view. It's something that the developers have handcrafted to show you what could be picked up and what they recommend for that ability. So for a certain ability, they may recommend certain support skills, but that is not the whole list. The whole list is way, way bigger. So there's a checkbox here at the bottom of this menu when you're cutting support gems. You can remove it and see all of the support gems in the game that you can actually apply to the skill you're looking at. If it can't be applied or you're already using it, it'll be blacked out or grayed out for you. But I think it's super important to be able to be aware of this. This is just so when you're learning the game, you don't come here and say, oh my God, which one do I pick? And so you may want to start with just doing these as your first character and you learn more and more, but you might find things, or you might find things online, or maybe you're following someone else's build and you don't see, like, you try to put support skills on here and you're like, wait a minute, crossbow shot can't have that support gem on it because it's limited. This is just a recommended view that's by default. You can turn it off to look at other stuff if you want. And the same thing goes for skill gems as well. You can go through and look at the other abilities. And we talked about earlier how you can very easily, even without much effort, put a different weapon on and have a different skill ready to go so that you can switch between them and use them as part of your kit. It's not that complicated. It's not that out of reach. You can definitely do it. The next one is kind of a small one, but it did help people in my chat, so I want to make sure I mention it as well. I see a lot of people saying that they either don't have enough scrolls of wisdom or they are unable to identify things. One thing you can get from the hooded one in town once you unlock him is he will be able to identify all items in your inventory at once for free. There's no cost for doing this. So what you can do if you're trying to save on your scrolls of wisdom, if you don't have a lot of them, is just fill your inventory with unidentified items, come to him, hit identify items, all of them will be identified. You didn't spend a single scroll on it at all. Generally, once you've played for a couple hours and beyond, you'll have way too many scrolls of wisdom anyway, but if you really run into a bind, every town has a vendor that will sell them as well for a small gold fee. So if you really need scrolls of wisdom and you don't have the hooded one yet, you can just come buy them. But again, once you get a couple hours into the game and beyond, you should no longer have an issue with this anymore. Next, I just want to mention a quick note on survivability. I did a full video on this separately, but I think it's worth noting that this can be something that you can neglect and end up punishing yourself for later. So pressing C on PC allows you to bring up your character screen. You want to keep a close eye on your defenses. Generally, you want to pick either armor or evasion. In some cases, you can mix them, but if you're a brand new player, just pick one of them and go with whatever one works for your character. Get a good amount of it early. It's going to make a big difference for you surviving, and figure out if you're going to be running energy shield or not, as that will be part of your build in some cases. And then on top of that, pay attention to your resistances. In a lot of cases, especially as you move between acts, you may have a build with a hole in it. Like sometimes I've seen people that go and fight like a cold boss and they have minus 45% cold resistance and they're getting one shot by everything and wondering why. And a lot of that just comes from just paying attention to the resistances, making sure you have a decent amount of armor and evasion and then some energy shield if it makes sense for your build. And you can very easily get resistances from rings or amulets or just various upgrades for your character through gear. You can even add modifiers to like your body armor, head armor to get more resistance on top of that. Adding extra life makes a huge difference for that as well. And just making sure you have good flasks on top of that. Make sure you're always upgrading your flask when you can, refilling your flask when you can. Go back to town, use the well, or hit checkpoints to get that refilled as well. And the last thing I'll leave you with, just so this video doesn't get crazy long, I'm trying to keep these, like I'm trying not to yap forever and ever because this game is so complicated you could talk forever. I just want to make a note around social parties and guilds as well. If you press J on PC, you'll be able to join a guild, either create a guild or have someone invite you to a guild and you can join it. And what's great about this is people can hot join your area and be able to help you with bosses, help you with loot, share loot with you, trade items with you, especially if you're playing in like a normal standard league. This is great. Now, if you're playing like hardcore solo self-found, or you are solo self-found in general, you won't be able to interact with other players in this manner. You'll have to play solo self-found items. But for most players, especially if you're just starting out in PoE 2, take advantage of guilds and other things, and especially getting a guild stash tab can make a big difference because people can share really good items, currencies, and things like that to make you stronger, and you can work together on that. And I imagine if you're someone who is like, you're not, I don't think the hardcore blasters that are trying to get world first uber pinnacle kills are watching tip videos on YouTube. So I imagine you're here, you're probably just looking for some advice and some tips on how to get better at the game and how to just enjoy your recreational time when you're off work, that sort of thing. So that's where I'm gonna leave the video today. Hopefully one of these tips helped you out. If it did, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.